Back on YouTube taking listener questions this week. Before I answer your latest questions, just a quick reminder that we are now 3 episodes into season 2. It's been about a month of posting some of those episodes. So a quick reminder that you can subscribe to the Brian J. Matos podcast anywhere, truly anywhere that you get your podcasts. Though you're listening to me on YouTube today, and this is a great place to subscribe. We are approaching 130,000 global subscribers. We'd love to eclipse that mark with this post. But if you're not a regular YouTube listener or you don't generally get your podcasts, you only listen to clips like this here, then feel free to head over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite podcast destinations. The show is widely available everywhere. One of the great things about doing this show without having exclusivity with any particular podcast provider is that we can be heard anywhere and everywhere in the world, regardless of what your favorite podcast platform is. The first episode of this season proved to be quite popular. We got a lot of positive feedback on our interview with Kate Howells. We haven't talked about space science that much in the first couple seasons of this show, so now that I know that that's an interest for everybody, we'll certainly be looking to bring Kate and potentially others back to discuss it in more detail. It is an important trend. It's an important topic that we'll likely be talking about for a long time. We spent an hour going through a lot of the current affairs around space travel, space exploration, some of the public debates that we're already having, and looking into the future at what will be coming. But if you haven't caught that first episode, I highly recommend that you go back to our episode 1 for season 3. As I said, proven to be quite popular. Also, we've had Irina Sukerman back on the show. Longtime listeners of this podcast will remember she has been with us before. So we spent another hour there going through geopolitical flashpoints around the world and kind of getting an update on geopolitics from somebody who's in a great position to give us some of that impact and opinion. And then a pretty interesting show, one of my favorites that we've been able to do since I've been doing this program, to talk to a active lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. Paul Lashenko joined us, and we spent a lot of time talking about drones and the battlefield of the future, the influence of artificial intelligence. We spent a little bit of time thinking and talking about the ethics involved in that and the public trust that's required for populations to permit their governments to use this type of technology, and again, how we in the civilian world should be thinking about this topic. So 3 great episodes. We have so much more to cover this season, but one of the great things about the show is that you don't have to listen to these in order. If any one of those topics strikes you as more interesting than the others, start with that one. We conduct these shows in a way that's really meant to be evergreen. You can go all the way back to our early episodes from season 1, any of our episodes from season 2, each of those conversations, mostly around 45 minutes to an hour, self-contained. They were impactful when we published them. They are still meaningful today. They're big picture topics. They're big global trends. And therefore, whatever order you want to listen to them and whenever you want to listen to them, they'll still be relevant to you. I've had some folks reach out and say, Brian, if I've missed a first season or 2, is this one of those that I got to binge listen to catch up to today? The answer is no. We did this show very much with the idea that folks would discover us along the way. You can listen to any one of our shows in any order that you want to. There's a few shows, from season 1 or 2 where we previewed something coming up in a future episode that obviously has passed. But by and large, the interviews themselves and the perspectives that I've offered are as relevant today as they were at the time they were published. And we hope will still be relevant years, frankly, from now. So however many or few of our shows you listen to, you can join anytime, you can pick up anywhere, and you can work your way backwards or work your way forwards, and you can extend an invitation to your friends, to your professional network to join the show. All are welcome, and it doesn't matter at what point you're picking it up. We don't necessarily record them in a specific order, and you can join this community absolutely anytime. And if you're taking some time for work or you've got things going on with your family, you spend a month or 2 away from us, when you come back, it'll all still be here for you, and the content will be as relevant and fresh when you pick it up as it was when we published it. So with that in mind, let me get to your questions. Thank you so much. I have been so tickled by opening up these segments on YouTube and actually getting a lot of questions. I wasn't sure if I was going to get any, if I'd have to really push our audience to reach out, but you've been great about reaching out. So many of you have found me on social media channels, any of your favorite channels. I don't have a preference. And through my email address, info at brianjmatos.com. So we'll turn to the email questions today. The first one comes from Liam in Sydney, Australia. Liam asks, Brian, with so much global focus on U.S. China tensions, what's your take on how middle powers like Australia or South Korea are reshaping regional dynamics? Liam, thank you so much for the question. I am certainly not the expert in this, but we have brought on many guests, and in fact, Arena, a couple of episodes ago, spent some time with me talking about the U.S. China relationship and the challenges therein. But we didn't spend, and maybe this is what prompted your question, quite as much time talking about, as you put it, the middle powers around the world. So let me take 2 minutes to just give you my thought process, because again, I am no geopolitical expert. I am merely an observer and somebody who asks questions of the experts. What I can say generally is, if we're going to a world, and so many analysts who've come onto our show and others have suggested we're already in a world with diminishing great powers, and if we're going to go into a world with potentially no major superpowers in the future, though I don't think we're there yet, then regional powers become much, much more significant. So to your point, a country like Australia that is a stable democracy with a strong economy, strong regional influence, militarily, economically, and culturally, a country like Australia suddenly becomes much more important to Southeast Asia, for instance. Not just its immediate neighbors, but a broader reach, perhaps as far away as countries like South Korea, where they'd have a collaboration and a cooperation among nation states that, while Australia individually may not be able to project significant power or economic influence all the way to East Asia, their ability to work with allies like a Japan or a South Korea would allow them jointly to ensure a free trade environment, a free exchange of individuals, of ideas, of businesses, and certainly of cultural values, which would be very important in a world where a country like China, also a regional power, wants influence in those same parts of East Asia and Southeast Asia. To have another regional power push back against them, or at least offer an alternative, would be the most likely path forward, and would give new opportunities to smaller countries like Australia that have been overlooked, I suppose, by the sheer power and scope of countries like the United States in their region. I would also remind folks that Australia is already a significant part of Western alliances with the United States, with the United Kingdom, for example, in partnership with India, in partnership with Japan. They're part of a number of alliances in their region of the world to begin with. So I think if you're living in Australia, you might have to get used to the idea that Australian foreign policy will have a bigger role to play without the dependency upon, let's say, the United States economic or military power, that Australia may have to bring more to bear on their own, and that they're going to have to take more responsibility for their immediate security with their own military, and potentially, with their own innovations and their own companies, without as much influence from Western Europe and the U.S., who may be paying attention to their own part of the world. South Korea was an interesting one. I think they have a unique challenge, being that they're bordered by an unfriendly nation to their north, obviously with North Korea, and a economically challenging nation to their west in China. Not to mention that the South Koreans themselves have their own internal challenges. Let's not forget, this is a country that, recently went through some political turmoil, and it's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last time. So I don't think those two countries are in exactly the same spot. I think Australia is a more stable, internally speaking country that has the benefit of ocean for borders, and that makes it an easier to defend place. And for South Korea, they're tied up in a region with a lot of challenges and a lot of rivals. So it does tie them down a bit, makes it unlikely for them to be able to project significant power. And if anything, requires them to have closer relationships with more powerful countries to ensure their own security. Great question, Liam. Thank you for that one. Hopefully that was helpful for you. And really what I wanted to give you there was just the way I'm thinking about it. But your question does prompt me to go back to some of my geopolitical guests and see if we can have conversations about that next tier of nations and those who are likely to be important in the next iteration of the geopolitical order, when we have more regional powers that have greater significance and fewer true global powers. All right, and the next question comes from Rajiv in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Rajiv asks, you often discuss long-term trends, but what's one recent event you think historians will look back on as a turning point, even if it didn't dominate the headlines? Well, I do think that there is an event that stands out among all of them, and it did dominate the headlines, though. So let me see if I can give you one that we all talked about when it happened, and I'll give you another one that maybe didn't make as much noise, but I think will have a big influence. So here in the United States, where I record this show, it was deemed by the U.S. administration as Liberation Day, but by the rest of the world, it was just Tariff Day. It was the day that the United States of America imposed tariffs on practically every nation in the world at various percentages, some surprisingly high, some a little bit lower, but it was a fundamental change in the U.S. trade relationship with the international community. It is one that was covered extensively at the time, but I don't think you can properly understand the significance of the announcement, the implications, the reactions, and the international community's realization that we're in a new era and the United States of America is truly trying to withdraw itself from international coalitions, including economic relationships, which I'm not sure that many world leaders or even global business leaders truly believed. But after that day, and with the implementation of many of those tariffs afterwards, it became real for individuals, businesses, communities, and governments that they have to find a new way forward. The reason I think that day will stand out in history is simply because it had been talked about for years and decades leading up to it, and there are many people who knew that there was going to be a paradigm shift at some point, but that was really the day when everybody had to come to terms with the idea that the United States of America was no longer going to be the constant in the international order. Whether you're an allied nation or a rival nation, the U.S. was fundamentally changing its relationship in a way that could even hurt itself, which few around the world thought the U.S. government would ever be willing to do. The reason I also think this is a critical moment is it changed the way that nations around the world think about U.S. debt and how much they'll be willing to borrow the U.S. at today's modest interest rates. And for anybody who understands anything about global economics, a nation that has the reserve currency and the trust of the world and a relatively low interest rate as a result of the trust and its intrinsic place at the center of economic activity has a huge advantage. And as that advantage goes away, it changes everything about international economics and how countries react and how countries invest and how they change their own domestic policies in a new paradigm. Now, we're not there yet, but I think in the years to come, we will start to see that new paradigm, and we will look back to that day, that quote-unquote Liberation Day, as a day that becomes almost impossible to truly undo or look past for its significance. Now, there was one other event that was relatively recent that it did not really dominate the headlines as much as maybe it would have in a different time and in a different era. And it has nothing to do with geopolitics per se. It was a moment in sports where I was a little bit surprised to see the reaction from the international community. And it was the moment that the U.S. and Canadian teams were playing each other, and there was real hostility on the ice between these two countries. And it was entertainment, and it's hockey. It's a sport that features plenty of hits, and fighting is part of the game. But the reason that I think it was so important as a turning point is that sports is the way that we express ourselves outside of politics. It's an extension of our culture, but it's also a spiritual experience for some people to just be in an arena full of folks wearing the same jersey, cheering for the same team, part of a common tradition. And for so many people, it's a family experience. Well, every now and then we have international competitions, and while you still have all of that spirit, it does allow some of the big trends and big pictures and some geopolitical angst to come through and to express itself in a cultural way. I don't know too many Americans, or too many Canadians for that matter, who ever thought that a hockey competition, and it was an exhibition one at that, between those two countries would ever take on significant political overtones. But it did, and it resonated in both places. These are two nations that have been allies and friends for as long as they've been next to each other in the modern era. Their sports rivalries are friendly to, perhaps somewhat more competitive in the Winter Olympics or whatever, but it's always an extremely friendly, sort of fraternal relationship. And it got much testier, it got much nastier. And then from that, you saw within a matter of a few months an election in Canada that was fundamentally altered by this new dynamic between its southern neighbor and itself. A nation that was on the path to having a clear conservative majority for many of the same reasons that conservative governments have come to power around the world. We saw the Canadian people do a 180 and return a center-left government to Parliament despite how unpopular it had been in the months leading up to the election. And I draw a parallel between that sporting event, Liberation Day that triggered it, and an election that followed that had real-world consequences. It's notable, too, that a country like Australia, since we just got a question from Australia, it's notable that Australia had something similar. Widely expected to have a conservative government, but because of a new trade dynamic initiated by Liberation Day and expressed through culture, changed the outcome of that election as well. So all of this to say, there are two big events, one that made news, a sports event that was sort of a one-day headline, and then these elections that didn't really get covered extensively around the world, but were noted for the day that they took place. There's a through line in all of them. And I believe that these early elections that came with some surprises that the center-left governments held against the right-wing populist wave is a signal of a larger change that is likely going to take place around the world. It's not that right-wing populism is going to back off or go away, but it is going to evolve. And there is going to be more of a centrist and a center-left pushback that is able to win elections in places, is able to put a backstop against the most extreme of those measures. And all of that is to simply say that the tides of history move in and out, and I believe that the tide of right-wing populism has crested. And it is going to begin to edge back in many places, but it's hard to know what exactly it'll be replaced with. In Canada and Australia, you saw traditional center-left governments return to power, and they are very traditionalist, which means they're going to face the same challenges that they faced that made them unpopular going into these elections. There's nothing fundamentally new coming out of either. But somewhere in the world, and it could even be in Western Europe or the United States, or it could be in other parts of the world that have elections still to come, there could be something new. And it could be something new on the populist left. That I have not seen any signs of really in culture, society, or policy yet. But if the pendulum of history follows a trajectory that it has before, And if we have reached the extent of the pendulum swing to the right wing of political governance, then it is only likely and natural that we see a swing back in the left direction. But we don't know exactly what that looks like, who's going to lead it, or where it's going to pop up first. But that's something that I'm looking for in the future. And I'll be looking for guests to come into this show and explore the topic with me to educate all of us. Well, Liam, Rajiv, thank you both for great questions. Love my listeners in Australia and Canada. Great, wonderful nations. I look forward to getting to visit you at some point, maybe with this show in the future. Keep the questions coming. info at brianjmatos.com. You can also find me on any of your favorite social media channels. I do check all of these personally, so would love to hear from you. Direct message me. Comments on YouTube. I read everything everywhere and would love to hear from everybody. Thank you again for listening to this latest edition of my Matos Musings, and I'll be back with more YouTube exclusive answering your questions, and of course on the podcast RSS feed anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Talk again soon.